Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Data Governance and Erwin Data Models Doesn't Just Happen. I'd like to start off with a few introductions today. Our first speaker is Marcy Barton-Goodwin. Marcy is the founder and CEO of Access Software Designs, and since 1989, Access Software Designs has provided education and consulting services to Fortune 1000 companies and government entities. Marcy is an expert in the field of enterprise model management infrastructure and is also the co-creator of EM-SOS. Marcy's company Access is a valued partner to Sandhill, and together we offer EM-SOS, our metadata management framework for Erwin DM to all our clients. Our second speaker is Jeff Harris. Jeff is Sandhill's enterprise architect and has been a long-time enterprise architect expert who's been addressing the issues of the convergence of data modeling and data governance during the past several years. You are, of course, listening to Robert Ludden, Vice President, Sandhill Consultants. Just a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, and we will publish it on our Sandhill Consultants YouTube channel in the following days. And if you have questions, we do watch the questions on the side there. Please feel free to submit your questions. We'll try and get to them at the end of the presentation. So with that, Jeff, you can go ahead to the next slide. Thanks, Jeff. In today's presentation, we'll be speaking about how data governance and Erwin data models is both the critical foundation for metadata development, but also the weak link in many data modeling environments. We'll be looking at critical data management issues while exploring the weak links in Erwin's data modeling environments and how users can overcome these limitations with Sandhill's EM-SOS 2.0 Jumpstart Edition. For the format for this webcast, we'll be starting with Marcy, who will be talking about the current data management issues as outlined by Gartner last year. These issues still persist this year, and we believe they can be resolved by a combination of Erwin DM and EM-SOS 2.0, our modeling framework. We'll then move over to Jeff, and Jeff will then demonstrate how Erwin DM and EM-SOS 2.0 can bring data governance to your models. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you. Marcy, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We're just going to start with outlining some of these issues that we have, and I'm sure that if some of these, if not all of these, are going to sound familiar to you in your environment. As all of us know, data governance has been accepted as a critical part of managing the quality of your company's metadata. But the structure and the timeframes of governance initiatives and programs differ wildly across different corporations. Despite the difference in these programs, they all have something in common. The strategies that form the basis for each data governance effort must deal with overcoming the issues that most organizations face. These issues may include metadata definitions, which are inconsistent, unwanted redundancy, causing a lack of data integrity, incorrect or misunderstood metadata, and that could potentially be due to mergers, acquisitions, and silo structures within the company. A lack of online documentation, which provides detailed metadata property requirements and associated processes. These are necessary to guide and manage the creation and maintenance of corporate metadata. In other words, there's really, in our experience, there has been an absence of a metadata management infrastructure, which is key in making sure that the metadata has integrity. Combined, these issues create a lack of trust. And that, unfortunately, constitutes the metadata integrity constitutes the foundation of our businesses. What we've noticed is that, making matters worse, the scale and the complexity of today's information systems continues to grow, providing a ripe environment for incorrect analysis, misguided VI results, excessive rework, missed deadlines, and overruns on project budgets. Unfortunately, these data management issues are widespread, and they're going to continue to multiply as incorrect metadata is propagated across the systems. So correcting these issues is really crucial to providing trustworthy metadata for the business's use. Jeff, if you could go to the next slide, please. Great. So it stands to reason that because we create metadata in our data models, we should be able to leverage those models and those data modeling tools to help us manage the integrity and consistency of our metadata. That's the source of it all. But despite the fact that data modeling tools do have necessary capabilities, they also have limitations in terms of bringing data governance to the modeling process. Next slide, please. So a quick look at what Erwin does give us, and needless to say, we're grateful for this. The tool can provide graphical representation of the data structures, obviously making it easier for us to look at logical requirements as well as physical design. It can support data dictionaries. We have the logical and physical sides, of course. We can have development reports out of Erwin that help the modelers see the details of what they're creating and use that as a development tool while they're modeling. We can use Erwin and customize naming macros, which is really critical and such a time saver, and allows for standardized things like how we name foreign keys and so forth. And Jeff is going to be showing much of this when we get to the demo portion. And also, Erwin has these wonderful things called domains. And we've noticed that some of our clients either don't know about them, don't use them, or use them in an inefficient way. Domains are very, very powerful in Erwin, and they can be used for consistent, standardized class words, frequently used attributes, and they give us the ability to make sure that those attributes or whatever are consistently standardized wherever they are used. And the other benefit is that if you make a change to one, there is inheritance involved, and it will change that description for that attribute throughout all the models that use it. So we're going to talk to you more about these domains later. Next slide, please. So we have all of these wonderful capabilities, but we certainly know that there are limitations too, specifically limitations to ask the tool to help us with data governance. We have so much freedom in using Erwin, and it doesn't automatically prevent different resources from working in what I think is almost like a personal kind of closed environment. Folks can go in and create, they can modify metadata without any awareness necessarily or regard to other structures that may exist in other models or whatever. And this freedom actually can produce a lot of inconsistencies and fosters the problems that we see here. It's difficult for us to get standardized metadata when everybody's doing their own thing. We can get conflicting data structures and so forth. In this list of bullets, the thing that I think is particularly difficult is that it prevents us from being able to create reusable, approved data structures. When we can do that, it saves us a tremendous amount of time and effort and brings consistency and standardization. So there needs to be a way to bring all of these limitations to the surface and reckon with them and figure out how we can solve that problem. Next slide, please, Jeff. So how do we achieve data governance for Erwin? It needs a framework, and that framework needs to leverage all of the functionality that Erwin DM does give us while solving the issue of what are its limitations. And these components that you see listed here are critical for metadata accountability. Next slide, please, Jeff. I want to talk just a little bit about these different components. There are 6 of them, and they're really critical. And that's why a framework that addresses these 6 components in conjunction with Erwin, it really brings a lot of success in terms of standardization. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about each one of these. Of course, we know what roles are, but too often there's confusion or conflict around who does what in terms of managing the creation and the maintenance of metadata. This is especially true when the organization doesn't have a data governance group or a similar team. Now, depending upon the size of your modeling environment, a specific committee or group may absolutely not be necessary, but it is important to delineate and document which named roles are responsible for which activities, as well as their level of authority in terms of change control and that sort of thing. Roles are not meant to stifle progress. Instead, they're essential for the streamlined running of a data management environment. As for architecture, in our case, when we discuss architecture, which has a lot of different meanings, we are referring to an established structure which supports the processes required to guarantee metadata integrity, completeness, and distribution. These processes, this architectural design, if you will, is often a stepchild. Most organizations have some level of data standards, yet don't recognize the importance of having documented processes in place. These processes ensure the validity and the non-redundancy of the metadata being created and maintained. And they also make it easier for the modelers, especially for new modelers that are brought in, to know exactly what to do and what the timeline is, what the activity sequence is, and so forth. So consistency in the management of metadata is important to make its use easier, not just for the modelers, but for the analysts who are looking at the metadata and the models, and also for the DBAs. So understanding what to do, when to do it, and who is responsible for those activities creates procedural stability in an ever-changing development and maintenance environment. A word about support. Support in data management comes from several sources, but I'm going to just concentrate here on the technical support that our modeling tools offer us. So Erwin DM can aid in managing descriptions, property standards, data dictionaries, etc. But the tool itself needs to be exploited for its functionality. So to utilize Erwin DM, or actually any data modeling tool, the tool needs to be standardized across the enterprise in order to be able to share and understand the models and the metadata they contain. When you use different modeling tools in different areas, it adds a lot of confusion in terms of what we're looking at and how do we read one model versus another because they came out of different tools. So we need to standardize that tool across the organization. Also, the resources using the data modeling tools should be well educated on the capabilities of the tool, as well as the procedures around the specifics of their use in your environment, because we can do things differently. Erwin allows us to do things in many different ways. So what's important is to find, I like to say, kind of like the short and sweet way of doing what you need to do in your company, because Erwin has a lot of flexibility in terms of how we can use it. Everybody needs to understand how we're using it in this particular way and use it consistently, so we kind of always know where the model is in terms of its development. And the tool's functionality specifically related to assisting with naming standards, reuse of data objects, maintaining data dictionaries, and so forth, that functionality needs to be understood. It needs to be utilized in a productive and a streamlined and consistent way. Next slide, please. Okay, the last three, communication. They say that communication is king, and we have found that that's also very true in modeling. It's the glue that binds the metadata environment together in a cohesive way. So communication between all the resources who have a relationship with the models, whether for development or maintenance or analysis, they need to have access not just to the models, but to the model's governing standards and procedures. Essential for this communication is accessible, well-written, and current documentation. Quality. There's no way to effectively and consistently create quality metadata without a definition of what quality consists of for you. There are basic, yet sometimes elusive requirements that include complete definitions, data standards that address all the properties of the term, including things like length and format, data type, both logical and physical. Also, what are the allowable exceptions to those standards, and quite a bit more. So a documented method to identify potential redundant metadata is crucial. Do we already have this entity? Is it already being used? What does it look like? Do we already have it, but it's called something else? There needs to be a way to quickly and easily find that information and understand whether or not it needs a correction or an update, or whether we shouldn't create this additional entity or whatever again. We usually have some corporate guidelines which address model design elements, such as how do we use color in models? We don't want to see different colors used for different things across different models. How do we use supertype and subtypes? How do we do denormalization in our organization? There's a lot more in that category, both logical and physical, but it needs to be documented. Otherwise, your data designs are going to differ across different models and give us different results. And finally, governance. So simply put, the processes of data governance ensure that metadata meets the requirements set out for its creation, including standards compliance, integrity, non-redundancy, accessibility. So it's not enough just to meet naming standards. Most organizations have those, but it falls short. There's got to be a simple yet effective policies and procedures part of this whole configuration, which support the company's data strategies. So whether your initiative or governance program is small or large in scope, the fundamentals of data governance as they exist for data models must be the foundation for the effort. Data models, for the most part, is where we do create our metadata. So it's critical to implement a model management foundation which supports the goals of governance. Next slide, please, Jeff. So all of these components make up a managed modeling environment. This provides a unified, organized, and accountable structure of data governance. It makes adherence to data requirements and metadata consistency possible. Now, the extent and ways in which these components are developed depends upon your specific environment. For example, how many resources are involved, how many departments or divisions are involved in the modeling, whether you have a governance committee, and so forth. But what is consistent is the need for each of these components, no matter the specific way in which they're implemented, both as an organizational process as well as the way you're using Erwin. Bringing all of these components together in a cohesive framework can be challenging, yet understanding these requirements helps in making its implementation successful. Next slide, please, Jeff. Okay, converting what to do into how to do it. So a framework must include model and data structure governance policies, logical and physical object standards, consistent procedures, measures to evaluate adherence to standards, and roles and responsibilities to enable clarity and efficiency. So Erwin DM provides the technical platform to manage the metadata. Best practices give us instructions based on a well thought out modeling structure. Now, I have to say that we have been involved in the modeling world for a very long time. And what we've noticed is that many organizations purchase a modeling tool and expect that the tool is somehow going to be the full solution all by itself. Unfortunately, this is not the case. I'm personally waiting for a psychic edition of Erwin, and then all I have to do is think what I want, but it isn't here yet. So unless there's a formal structure around model and governance activities, which the tool does not give us, the tool just represents a disparate, disjointed set of utilities, all of which we need, but are not in and of themselves the full solution. It's the framework that surrounds the use of that tool that gives us a successful model and governance program. Okay, Jeff. So Jeff is going to be giving you some demos here of Erwin and its capabilities with governance, as well as our EM-SOS framework working in conjunction with Erwin. But I just want to say that developing a model management framework, an infrastructure, it's critical, but this task may be challenging. It can be time consuming. Resources may not be available. Everybody's already working full time, as we know. Also, there may not be the expertise in the standards and procedures domain. It may not exist within your current resource availability. And your existing documentation, of which I'm sure you have some, may be scattered across systems and or departments, and also they may be incompatible in content and format. Some may be in spreadsheets, Word docs, and that sort of thing. It's important to bring all of this together in a cohesive way. So we'd like to introduce you to EM-SOS, which provides well-written standards and procedures. It has workflows for the activities that need to be done. It has model templates to make standardization easy and to increase the productivity. And it's accessible. It's easy to implement. It goes up on the company's intranet. Everybody can get to it and easily see where the information is. And it incorporates the significant functionality of Erwin DM. Okay, Jeff, next slide. We're almost at the demos. This is new for us. We're offering EM-SOS 2.0 as tiered offerings. And this format, this offering is different for us. What we've come to understand working with all of our customers is that companies have different levels of maturity in terms of the structure and the checks and balances which determine and guide their modeling environments. So this tiered approach is geared to address the different needs of our clients, ranging from a company that has a relative lack of standards and procedures to huge enterprise environments that may have failed to have a cohesive strategy and an infrastructure to support it. So it might be a particular tier that satisfies your specific needs. You could start at a Jumpstart level and maybe that's good enough. Or you may start with the Jumpstart entry level and migrate through to intermediate and enterprise. It's kind of like, one size doesn't fit all for most products, most applications. So we've designed the offerings to support where your modeling environment is today and where it needs to go. So for the purpose of this webcast, Jeff is going to be showing you the EM-SOS Jumpstart Edition. So you're going to see a lot of what's in there, as well as how it guides the supporting Erwin functionality. Jeff, over to you. Thank you all.
Hi, thank you, Marcy. Welcome, everybody. One of the key things that we look at with EM-SOS is it's built on a framework of SharePoint. So within SharePoint, you have all the functionality available to you, including the drop-down menu capability, the follow me links capability, and a navigation functionality. So through the navigation, we can navigate to any particular document or particular page that you're looking for. So we're going to start off with the data model lifecycle. And you'll notice that it actually comes in as a PDF document. This is one to show you the capability of being able to incorporate PDF documents and to leverage the PDF functionality within the PDF document. But not all our pages are built on PDFs. So I'm going to take us quickly to our standards, and we're going to go and have a look at the object naming standards. And we're going to specifically look at the logical data model objects. So within this, you can see the page is a HTML style page, and we categorized everything into specific categories. So as you can see, the responsibility, description, definition, and a tip section. Now this, within here, we will have the links to be able to take us to sub pages. So like we've gone to the attributes page, we have a section now defining the standards for attributes. So in here, we can see the full description of how we're actually going to have a naming standard for an attribute. Things like the length, the case, all of those type of things are incorporated, what to look for, what not to look for, and some examples. And like we saw earlier, we have a tip section. So within the tips, we can see what tips are recommended and a revision history for the document. So as you can see there, we can actually keep track of revisions of the document. Who authored it, who approved it, and what was changed. Now let's just quickly move on from there. Let's go into some of the standard operating procedures. And I'm specifically going to go to the model creation and population procedure. First thing you'll notice, the similar purpose responsibility type of layout. So through that, you can actually see the uniformity of the solution and the description section, giving you the description of this particular procedure. And you'll notice the tips and a revision history as well. So as you can see, this is the type of documents that you'll be able to navigate through. We also have a related topic section that links us to anything that's related within our particular page. And something like template usage. We're going to go to template usage because this is how we actually implement it in the Erwin data modeler environment. So once again, you'll see the familiar layout of your purpose, responsibility, description, and it'll give you a good breakdown how to make usage of your templates, how to implement them, and also notice the graphics that we've made use of. So embedding the graphics to be able to make it easier for somebody to see how to implement it, what's been implemented in the template, etc. So this is how you would actually go about making use of the templates and understanding what's embedded in the template itself. And as we scroll down, you can sort of see the depth and the extent we've gone to within our documents to be able to help you understand all of the aspects of working within the Erwin environment. And the tips and the reversion history are also there, the same as all the other documents. So with that, you've seen how we can use EM-SOS to be able to produce our documents. Now we're going to jump a little bit sideways and we're going to go into Erwin. And in Erwin, we can actually see how we can actually go and start creating a model using the predefined template usage procedure. So we create a new model, define the type of model. So in ours, we're going for a logical physical based on SQL Server 2012. And this is where we make use of our templates. So by using the template, we then have the full access to the template. And we're going to preserve the template binding so that we will always be able to come back to the same template and retrieve any data that's been added. Now, when we land on the new model, you'll notice that the model has several pages or diagrams, and you'll notice that it's white. It's based on the logical physical, where the standard one is got the different sort of color, where here we got a white background. So that shows you how we've used the themes coming from our template, which is also applied in our physical model side of our model. So all of this has come in from our templates. including our naming standards. So as you can see here, we've got a full list of abbreviations that's all been brought in from our template and any of the other naming standard objects that we would require. And the same applies to our model naming properties. You can see the macros that we've implemented, the usage of the glossary, the physical side, how we've changed the case upper, lower, initial cases, the lengths on the both logical and physical side of our model. So through that, we also make use of the domains that we've brought in. So the domains are giving us these like mini templates. So let's go and create an entity and see how we make use of these domains. So we're first going to create a client entity, and then we're going to pull in a ID column. Notice how it names the ID column. So it's not just ID, it's client ID. And it's brought in a definition which comes in from our domain. Likewise, it's also changed the data type to what we want for our ID and our logical only options. Next, we're going to pull in the rest of our client information. So let's say we want a first name and we also want a last name. So we're pulling in the first and last name, and let's pull in a date of birth. So we use a generic date domain, and then we go in and rename it to make it a date of birth. So by renaming it, we've created our client date of birth, and we created our first entity. Now I'm creating a second entity, our address entity. And likewise, we're also going to put in a couple of attributes into our model. So first, the address ID, same as we did before. We're going to have an address line. Let's make this address line 1. And we're going to create another address line. Let's call it address line 2. So we go in, rename it. And then we're going to pull in some other objects from our domain. So let's say we get a city. And then we can go for state and postal code, which is our zip code. And the last one, we can give it a country. So by using this, we can create our entities quickly for us. And likewise, we're going to create a relationship between our address and client so that we can have our foreign key relationship. Now I want to switch over to the physical side of our model. You will notice how we've made use of the abbreviations, changed things like postal code to zip code, first and last name, date of birth is DOB, all these type of naming conventions that might be in your organization have changed from the logical side to the physical side. So as you can see in the logical, it's still client date of birth, but on the physical side, we've changed it to DOB. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull down from our shared object model some objects to be able to incorporate in our model. So this is a typical third-party model, and we're going to pull in the party information. So we need to pull in the entity and relationships. So using the design layers, we can achieve this, and we just need to select the particular entities we want to pull in. So we're going to pull in party, which is the client entity, and we're going to also pull in the party status tables and any relationships that are associated with them. So you will notice that we go into a complete compare screen. This is very typical, so we're just going to quickly make it easier to see what we're looking at. And we'll notice that party and client are unrelated. So we're going to use the complete compares facility to match the two together. So now we are looking party is a client. And the first thing we're going to look at is you'll notice that some of the objects or some of the properties for client are not related. So we are moving across things like definitions. Let's go to the attributes. The same thing, they were unmatched. So let's match them quickly. So our birth date matches our date of birth. And we're also going to look at the properties below. You'll see how it can bring the differences in properties. The next one is our family name, which is a last name. We also need to look at the given name, which is our first name. And the last one is the identifier, the party ID. We need to select party ID and match that to our client ID to be able to keep the identifiers in sync. We can also go through and start looking at each one of the particular objects and then start seeing the properties and move across. Like date of birth has got a generic date of birth date field. So we want to make it specific as a date of birth. And let's look at family name. The same thing, we want to bring the definition across. And we also want to look at the data type. Notice that we got different data types, so we want to bring that in line with our corporate standard from our domains. And likewise, with the given name, we bring across the definition, and the data type we also bring across. Now with that, we've been able to pull across all the relevant information from our standard shared object model. We also want to bring in the party status and this party status type. So by bringing these two in, we then can bring in all the information from our shared object model. That includes all the properties, all the definitions, etc. And what's also important is to recognize the relationships. So we're going to bring the party status and status type relationship across and bring it into our model. Quickly collapse everything up and just have a quicker look. And if we look at the party entity and the relationships, we will notice that we've got a relationship. Where are we going here? There it is. We got our party has a relationship and client has a status of party status. So we can see that we've actually got these relationships in our model, and that tells us we are good to go. And by finishing up, we close down the shared object model. So we pulled all this information in, and now we created a model with a whole lot of new entities. Remember, we only had the client and the address. Now we've got a relationship to our party status entity, and we've also pulled in our party status type entity. And through that, we've got our relationship to party status. So these are the entities that we've pulled into our model from our shared model objects. And likewise, we'll see this on the physical side using the abbreviations. I know there's a couple of abbreviations that don't match up, that are not in our dictionary, but this is just the demo to show you how it all ties together. So moving on from that, we're also going to next look at the logical side again, and we can see exactly how this all ties together in being able to incorporate objects from our shared object model and how we've used our domains and how we brought our naming standards into our environment. So we're going to move on to showing you another part of what EM-SOS brings to the table. So this was how we actually create a new model. These class words, these domains, these abbreviations, the naming standard macros are all being predefined via the standards that have been defined in EM-SOS. So how do we check our model and make sure our model is compliant? So we're going to quickly move on to the reporting side. So we're going to look at some standard reports, and we're going to use the standard reporting functionality built in Erwin Data Modeler. So the report designer is the tool that we use for reporting. And I've got a pre-packaged set of standard reports, which is part of the reporting from EM-SOS. And we got several reports to be able to report on our particular model. So when we go in, like we look at duplicate entity report, there's no entities. Now, if we look at the entities without definitions, if you remember, address didn't have a definition. If we go to attributes without definitions, same thing. We got two attributes that we didn't have definitions for. So those two are, these are our warnings to us to say why we are not compliant. So let's go back to our entities without definitions. So we know our address entity doesn't have a definition. So we can go into our entity properties, and then we can actually go to the definition tab. We see it is empty, and we can give this entity a definition. So by giving it a definition, we have now complied to our standards. And if we go back to our reports and we rerun that same report again, we will notice that address is no longer non-compliant. And we can do the same thing for our attributes without definitions. We can actually go to those two attributes, give them definitions, and that's how we can make our model compliant to our standards. So by using these reports, we can then actually get to a point where our model is compliant to our corporate standards and is based on the EM-SOS standards as being broadcast to us. So once we've done that, we're now going to go into the workflow side. Now, this is a video that we've recorded on how to go through the workflow. So please excuse, it's a little bit fuzzy, but this is how we'd actually go through and actually create a starter workflow. So the logical data model submission and deliverables workflow. By clicking on that, we will actually initialize a workflow to be able to capture all the details. So first off, we need to just give it the name that we've given for our model. So we'll just call this our workflow demo and a due date. And it's a date that the workflow has to be completed by. So here we're setting for the 31st of December. The next thing is the contact name. So this is the data modeler created the model. We then use an email address. At each step during this process, we send out emails. So part of the workflow is sending out emails to the next level to be able to interact. So we need to be able to track emails appropriately, and also a contact phone number should they want to phone you. And then you will go through and select all of the options as defined by your standards. So you are saying that you have complied to all of these standards. And you'll go through all the checkbox, making sure everything's right. And at any point, if you don't feel that you've were right, you can always go back, save your workflow, and you'll notice that it's saved it. And it will come back into our screen as a saved request. And once it's in our saved request, we can then go in, change the model, verify in the model, whatever we need to do, then come back into the workflow. And once we come back into the workflow, we can then continue through the process. Okay, so now we're back in our workflow. You'll notice all the same information still captured from before. Now we're going to just quickly go through and select all the other options and verify all the other details about our model, and that we have complied to all of the standards that are required for our corporate data modeling standards. And let's just quickly zip through all of this. And once we're finished, we can print our request, or we can actually submit it straight away. So by submitting it, we send it to the next layer, which is our project lead. and our project lead will be able to then review it. So as you can see there, we say it's submitted for review. So as a project lead, they will log into EM-SOS as well. They will then be able to go through and view all of their workflows. Remember, they received an email telling them that this model is ready for review. So it's now submitted for review. They can go in and actually have a look at the particular model, have a look at the workflow, and see where we are with, is it compliant to our project? Does it satisfy our project requirements? They can read through all the options that you selected and any comments that you've made in the submission process. And they can go back to the top. And if they're not satisfied, they can use the documentation and discussion. But we're going to send it back for review to the data modeler and let the data modeler fix it. Basically, in this particular model, we don't have a customer entity. So we are typing in, we've received the, reviewed the model, and there is no reference to our customer entity. So basically, the data modeler needs to go back and have a look at the model again and update it accordingly. But you'll notice that it has actually generated a date type stamp and who reviewed it. And you'll also notice that it's blue, indicating that it is not completed, and that comment has come into the discussion section. So through that, it then gets passed back to the data modeler. So now the data modeler also goes into EM-SOS, goes into the workflows, and he will be able to go in and see that it's returned for revision. By clicking on the workflow demo, they can then get in and actually see that the comment made. They then can go into the model and make changes. They can review what was said as far as their standards are concerned, how they complied. Notice everything is read-only at this point for them. They can't change it. They can reply back to the project lead. And after they've done their changes, obviously, I have included the customer entity. And when they submit that, it goes back to the project lead, ready for the project lead to review it again. So as a project lead, they will go into their workflows, see that it's come back to them, return for review, and then they can have a review of it, look at the model, see what comments have made in the discussion section. And from there, they can say whether it's complete or not. By clicking complete, it then takes it to a point where we need to add a comment just to say we've reviewed it and that we've approved the model for our project requirements. And once that happens, you'll notice that it's gone green, putting a date, time stamp, and who did it as the review process. And now it gets passed on to the data architect. And the data architect then comes in also after they've received notification, goes into the workflow. They will notice that the review's completed. Now they can go in and approve it from their side. Once again, they can read through all of the various information provided, the standards, how they complied to the standards. This is more important for the data architect to ensure that they complied to the corporate standards. They can then also review any comments that have been made up to this point and see what comments have been made and go through and add new comments if they want to. And when they're happy, they press the approve button to approve the model from the enterprise standard level. When they submit, it now goes back to the project lead for publishing. Now, bearing in mind this workflow is based purely on what we see as a standard workflow. All these workflows are customizable. So the project lead will then go back into the workflow engine and be able to go and publish this model. Now, publishing is a process. If you've got something like the Erwin web portal, you then can publish to the Erwin web portal, being able to give everybody sight of the model. So as you can see, it's approved. They go into it, into the workflow. They can see all the information provided, that the data architect has approved it, and now they can actually publish the model. That basically brings the workflow to the end of the workflow, and they then have published it on the intranet for everybody to see. So that's the process of how we can manage the workflows within EM-SOS. As I said, they're all customizable. All of these are what we deem to be a standard workflow. But if your organization has a different process, we are more than welcome to edit them based on the different tiered level that you purchase. From there, we're going to hand you over back again to let Robert take you through the next set of slides.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Marcy. I've just got a couple of slides to wrap up. I wanted to come back to the key point that we talked throughout this presentation, which is data governance in Erwin data models doesn't just happen. It's our hope that through the previous 45 minutes, the viewers can see how leveraging both Erwin data model and EM-SOS 2.0 or Jumpstart Edition together forms the foundation of data governance. So here's a quick summary of the outcomes of implementing a framework such as EM-SOS 2.0. In purchasing an enterprise managed modeling environment, it can save an organization a lot of time, money, and effort. As you've seen that we provide a whole bunch of predefined critical standards, procedures, guidelines, templates, forms, and metric reports based upon the tiered level that you're interested in. We also provide established data model life cycles based upon our experience, and this provides end-to-end integrity on the control of the data model that you produce and the processes to ensure the quality data model output. You have seen how we actually implement the metadata quality control standards, and we provide parameters for producing consistent quality definitions and formats, which is key to increasing interoperability across the models and across the applications. You've just seen, obviously, Jeff demonstrate the repeatable workflow and the processes. This is a huge benefit in reducing the training time and increases consistency across the organization and across the teams that are using the tool sets. We've defined measures and metrics critical for reporting on how to evaluate and monitor the quality control process and how an organization can see that their artifacts are getting better and more mature as they continue to produce the artifacts that are defined. And of course, by and large, a centralized communication mechanism. This decreases communication, decreases confusion, it increases communication, it enables efficient enterprise-wide communication across the organization and the empowerment for the resources. So Jeff, go ahead and go to the next slide. So Sandhill Consultants offers a way to discover how an organization can increase standardizations. And we do that by offering an initial enterprise modeling assessment, which centers on the evaluation of reuse and redundancy of the data structures within an organization, how much they have today. This short-term engagement analyzes your current modeling environment and delivers a finding and recommendation document, providing the analysis and specific recommendations for streamlining and improving the modeling infrastructure. If your end destination is to improve your trust and control and leverage of your metadata, then obviously we would recommend one of our tiered level solutions for you. And you can find out by taking our assessment or contact us to see an in-depth demonstration of Enterprise Management Set of Standards 2.0. Jeff, go ahead and go to the next slide. We've obviously got, you can see here are a few of our logos of clients who have been very successful in implementing EM-SOS, and where Sandhill and Access Software Designs have been helping organizations on their data modeling and data governance journey. And it would be a pleasure for us to help you move in that direction. And so, Jeff, if you can just go to the last slide, I'll just check. There were some questions that have come up that we want to make sure we address before we end this presentation. The first question I see here is that can the workflow be changed or can additional workflow be added? Yes, Jeff, believe mentioned that, yes, we can tailor the workflow. We can also create new workflows, and we would identify them during the discussion period of the consultant engagement, which accompanies a EM-SOS engagement. Second question here that is, what is the recommendation on where to start? From our point of view, we see EM-SOS as a great enhancement to the Erwin data modeling toolset. And what we would normally do is we'd start with an assessment. This assessment allows us to help the organization evaluate where you're at, where you want to go, and where you need to be. And so obviously for our audience here that's watched this video, we'd like to thank you for your time. If you are interested in a demonstration of one of the tiered editions, or you'd like to learn more about EM-SOS 2.0 in more detail, please feel free to contact me, Robert Lutton. You can see my email there on the screen. And of course, we'll follow up with our participants to answer any unanswered questions in the coming days. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.